I think it's very important to understand when we're talking about Chris Chan that the people who troll him are obsessed with Metal Gear Solid. They call themselves the Miscreants after the Patriots. Basically, everything they do is modeled on a really dumb Metal Gear Solid plotline. And this is where that kind of reaches the ultimate degree with kind of the strongest agent of the Patriots, the organization led by Clyde Cash. So this brings us to Liquid Chris. So Liquid Chris basically is a guy who shows up and he claims to be the real Christian Weston Chandler. Now, as we know, Chris Chan was born Christopher Weston Chandler, and he later changed his name. So when Liquid Chris shows up, Liquid Chris says, I was always Christian Weston Chandler, and my identity has been stolen by Christopher Weston Chandler. Trolls came to call Ian Brandon Anderson for whatever reason. But from here on, I will refer to the person who is trying to screw Chris Chan over as Liquid Chris, and the actual Chris Chan as Solid Chris. Liquid Chris showed up with a video. Now, it's kind of interesting because Chris Chan makes vlogs and he goes, Captain's Log. And he always talks about, he always does it in like that format, although Chris Chan has never seen Star Trek. But he watched an episode of South Park where they talked about Captain's Log. There's one funny one where he talks about how he's crashed into slumber. But yeah, so Liquid Chris shows up and he has a crappy paper cutout Sonichu medallion. He wears the same striped shirts as Chris Chan. He put a pillow under his shirt to make himself seem obese, and he imitates Chris Chan's autistic speaking style. And he claims that he is the true and honest, real creator of Sonichu. That Solid Chris stole his identity and stole the concept of Sonichu from him. And of course, all the trolls sided with Liquid Chris, so they all started harassing Chris and calling him Ian, and saying that Liquid Chris was actually the real Chris, and that Solid Chris copied him. It was kind of funny because later on in the saga, Chris Chan basically, with no self-awareness, says, Liquid Chris can't be me because everybody hates me, trolls me, mocks me, and I'm an autistic loser that no one gives a shit about. And he's like, and people like Liquid Chris and they think he's funny. And that's kind of the irony, the whole thing. So just a bit of background about Liquid Chris. He was actually in an interview, or he had a part in a documentary. Liquid Chris is ironically the opposite of Chris Chan in a lot of ways. Liquid Chris was born with a withered left arm. I think that's a medical condition that's fairly common. And because of that, he dedicated himself to become a man of science. I think he's a biologist or some sort of medical researcher, and he devoted his life to science and to try to cure people of the condition that he was born with. He's also married. I think he has children, and he's rather successful. He has like a good career, etc. So it's just kind of funny. But so he showed up and he started basically trying to take Chris's identity over, and everyone supported him. So what wound up happening was, so it was also revealed that Liquid Chris had a girlfriend named Casey, who's obviously severely overweight, but takes pictures to try to hide it, who's actually his in real life girlfriend, and they both went to school together and studied biological and medical sciences. So Liquid Chris not only stole Solid Chris's identity, but he was also more successful than him in terms of love. And Casey talked about how she was in love with Christian Weston Chandler because of his creation of Sonichu. So this was during a time that some guy was holding Solid Chris's account hostage. So Solid Chris challenged Liquid Chris to a series of contests to try to prove who was the real Christian Weston Chandler. This also led to one of the funniest ones where he yelled about how Liquid Chris had a medallion made out of paper, whereas his was made from Crayola fucking model magic. So some of the Solid Chris dug up a video of him playing Rock Band, no, Guitar Hero, with by playing More Than a Feeling. And then Solid Chris proved that he could actually play the guitar pretty well, and he played More Than a Feeling on his guitar, whereas Chris Chan was just acting like a retard with the other guitar. So then there was a Spanish chat where Chris Chan knows a couple words in Spanish, so he did that. Then it turned out that Liquid Chris knew not only Spanish but French, German, and Japanese. So Solid Chris lost that. Then they had to sing. Then they had another sing-off. Chris had made a parody of I Want It That Way, So Need a Cute Girl. And Liquid Chris got like a band to make him a good rendition of So Need a Cute Girl. So he won that one too. So Solid massively lost a competition against someone who was imitating him. So announced that he had a job at Microsoft making the Sonichu game. The Dark Horse Comics was making the Sonichu comics. Made a store that sold Chris's Sonichu stuff, and he moved out of his parents' house. Solid Chris mocked Liquid Chris for his nasal tone, his brown striped shirt. Chris buys all of his shirts at Goodwill, and they're all striped clown shirts. He mocked him for making money off of Sonichu and for his appearance. To quote the Quickie article, it's a bad sign when one is fighting a mirror, and worse when the mirror is winning. So as I stated earlier, Solid began to believe that Liquid couldn't be the real Chris because only the real Chris CWC is a retard who is the laughing stock of the internet. Therefore, the fact that Chris isn't trolled and doesn't do dumb shit, also that girls and people like him, shows that he is not the real Chris. He didn't understand the irony. Solid Chris was upset that Liquid Chris had a girlfriend and he didn't. So Solid Chris pretended to be Liquid Chris, and he talked about titty fucking her and coming on her and then licking it off because he believes that semen has to be recycled. So Casey pretended that she believed that Solid Chris was Liquid Chris until it realized that it was actually Solid Chris. So the impersonation was revealing insight into Chris's mind. He accused Liquid of being an imposter, but then impersonated the guy who was impersonating him. Chris was terrible at impersonating Liquid, even though he was impersonating someone impersonating himself. And Casey had to try to correct it while pretending to be fooled by it. Chris Chan also insulted Solid Chris insulted Liquid Chris for and called him a loser because of all the things that Liquid Chris was impersonating about Solid Chris. She got upset at Chris Chan because he tried to trick her and pretend that he was actually Liquid Chris when he was Solid Chris. So he made a video entitled I Love You, Casey, and then he had a love quest to try to steal her and to think that she was in love with him despite no reason. So he made a video attacking Liquid Chris to say that he had won Casey's heart. So eventually what happened was Chris got into an argument with Casey's father after attempting to prove his worthiness as a man. In the process, Casey showed how utterly messed up he was mentally and physically and returned to Liquid's waiting arms. Chris' chances were utterly dashed after she got a hold of his comic to her and learned that he was going to kill Liquid Chris here. So he claimed that he would be depressed forever since Casey left him later, and then she married Liquid Chris. And after that, Liquid Chris went on to probably live a normal life, only to show up again during the Asperchu saga, which we'll cover next time. So hopefully I was able to explain it. It kind of defies belief just how freaking weird the whole Liquid saga is. I mean, it's awesome. It's literally like the most crazy thing I've ever heard, but it's crazy in a completely awesome way.